Okay, so what you see in the vise is what's known as a 2-cent Caddis. The original was not tied on a jig hook, but we're going to tie this one on a jig hook. And really the only modification here is just the veil, which is just these long fibers. I'm going to use mohair here, and I find that it's easy to use. I can keep it super sparse. But you can use dubbing or regular wool. Mohair is basically wool. And depending on what you get, it may have an acrylic blend in there as well. So, but the fibers are long; they're easy to work with for the purposes of what we're going to do here. So, it's a good option, and it's relatively cheap. So, let me get my hook in the vise. So, what I have in the vise here is a size 12 jig hook, and I've paired that with a 1/8 or specifically 3.3 millimeter black tungsten slotted bead. If you're not familiar with working with jig hooks, you need the slotted bead so that it will slide over the bend. If you have a regular bead, it's going to bump up to it and not come over like this. So you got to have that slot in there. The thread I'm going to be using is 140 denier. Sorry, I know it's super reflective. Danville. Flat waxed. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to pull out a good 6 inches of thread off the tip of the bobbin. And so when you're tying on, what a lot of people will do actually is take wire, like lead wire or 10 wire, and they will back it just a little bit. To get down there and seat the bead so that the bead doesn't move around. We're not going to do that on this. So I'll show you kind of how you can get around that. So I'm going to start my thread right behind the eye, or right behind the bead as it were. And I'm going to work my thread kind of down into the bead, if you can see that. I'm just going to kind of build up a little bit of a bump down inside. We don't have to get crazy with it, but what it's going to ultimately do in the long run is going to help us finish the fly. And so we're just kind of chewing up real estate here right now. So don't get too crazy with it. I've got maybe, I don't know, 12 to 15 turns in there. Next I'm going to keep this long tag in my hand because we're going to need that later. And I want to keep it to the side, my side of the hook shank. And I want to get it started, so as I wrap back, I want that to lay on the side. So if it's laying underneath, you can lift it up, start wrapping back until you've actually caught it, lay it down on its side. And we're going to build up a small taper here. So we're going to come back to about the third position of the fly, or roughly 2.5 to 3 bodkin widths behind the bead. And I'm going to wrap back forward. Again, I'll put a couple turns in there. And I'm going to wrap back, keeping that tag right along the side until I'm about a bodkin width or half bodkin width in front of the hook point. And now I'm going to wrap back forward again, just slowly building that taper. And whoops, I don't want to come back yet. Now I'm going to take this tag, I'm going to put it in a clip. So if you got a clip behind you, it'll be very beneficial here. So next we need our marabou, and there are several ways that you can handle the marabou, and I'll show you the 2 ways that I think are the best. And it's just going to depend on, well, maybe I get in front of the camera. It's just going to depend on whether or not what you're comfortable with. So when you're selecting your marabou for this fly, you want to find something it's long. So when I put it up next to my hand, it's pretty good size. I don't have extra large hands, but I don't have small hands. I guess I could say I have medium-sized hands. And so we want something that's about like this. Now the nice thing about selecting something with these long barbs is we're only going to use the sides of them. And that's going to leave you the tip, maybe from the midway point or so forward, to use the tip. And so if you're following along with the classes, make sure you save this because we're going to be using this for the jig bugger in week 4. But so let me bring my fly back into place. So what we're looking for is actually some barbules that are about 3 times the length of the entire fly, from in front of the bead all the way to the bend. And it can be kind of tricky to work with. You don't want to wet the marabou on this one. Normally I'd say wet the marabou if you can't, if you're struggling with doing it, but it can kind of mess up the fly as we're building it. And so you just kind of take it and you just run it to see if you've got about 3 times the width, and there's about 3 times the width there, or I'm sorry, not width, length. And so next what we got to do is we actually have got to select what we're going to use, and so this can be a little tricky because we just don't need much. So if you turn the marabou on its side and just let the fibers hang down, you can kind of pull them down and you can kind of get a feel for where the longer ones are. And in this case, these ones are going to probably be just a little bit short of what I'm looking for. And so I'm going to strip those off. Sorry if that wasn't in camera. I'm going to strip those off and just kind of let them fall naturally. Then I'm going to take my bodkin and kind of start to separate them. What I'm looking for is literally about 5 or maybe 6 individual strands of marabou. You just don't want to have too much here. It'll build up too big of a body too quickly, and you won't like the look of your fly. So selecting your marabou here, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be out of camera. Selecting your marabou here can be pretty important. Now there's 2 ways to do this when you tie it in. Once you've got it selected off the bird side, you can kind of pinch the marabou here so that these fibers are isolated. And if you really struggle with working with marabou, this might be a good option. Normally what I would do is just actually take these off and separate them from the stem. And so if you're comfortable doing that, go for it. But what I like to do is I'll collect the entire piece of or the entire feather in my hand, and with my fingers I'll kind of cup it so that it's not in my way. Sorry, it's a little tricky to do this with the camera in front of me. The thing wants to roll on me. Usually I'm doing it just a few inches in front of my face, and now I'm about 1.5 feet out. So we're going to collect it just like that. And now we can grab the tips, like so. And just so we don't slide out and make a mess, I'll cut the tips. Now I'm going to lay those tips directly on top and in front, and I'm just going to put 2 loose thread wraps over. If you add any tension, they're going to spin and flare on you, and we don't want that. And so once I have that, I can kind of just gently pull down. Next I'll reach forward with my left thumb, left index. I'm going to draw the fibers to the back, and now I'm going to start wrapping those fibers back. As I'm doing that, I'm allowing my left thumb and left index to slide down the hook shank just ever so slightly. And once I've got them to about that distance, and I'm ready to remove the marabou, what you want to do is you want to pinch the marabou close to the stem, and then whatever you're wanting to keep, hold that still. And we're going to remove the stem from the marabou. And now you can wrap it back. You also want to take this and turn it to your tire side, or the side that you have your tag, this long tag. We want those to line up. So if they're not quite lining up and you're getting close to the back, one thing you can do is you can release the tag from your clip. You can kind of pinch them together and get them to line up. So the final destination for our thread is just beyond the barb, or the hook point, right where the barb would start if this was a barbed hook. Next we're going to just take our thread and bring it forward all the way to the front, all the way behind the bead. And as we come forward when we're wrapping our body, you want to pay attention to if this bead is slid at all, and you want to make sure that you adjust that so that the cut parts or the slots are on the top and the bottom. So next what we need to do is we've got to get this into, we've got to spin it up. And the way I like to do it is I'm going to use my hackle plier. But I'll take my left index finger, I'll wrap the marabou around and pinch. And the better you get at this, you can actually make it pretty quick, because you let this marabou kind of slide through. You'll feel the tips coming through your right thumb, right index. You'll get right to the tips. And then what I do is I'll take my hackle pliers and I'll come straight at them. So that way, when I've got it collected, my tag is hanging out the bottom. You can have it hanging out the side, but I just feel like it doesn't twist up as well. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of some of this tag. I leave a little bit in there in case the marabou breaks or something and I have to redo this. I'll turn my vise to the side. Now the reason I want that tag in there is because we're going to start to rotate, and what this is going to do is it's going to start to reinforce the marabou. That's going to get it to hold up a little bit longer for you. And we're just going to gently twist. I'm just twisting the top of my hackle plier and catching it with my fingers down below. And we don't want to over twist here. Once we start getting this kind of, I kind of call it the Christmas tree effect. That's good enough. And we'll start to wrap forward. You don't want these wraps tight together necessarily. You want them to be just a touch spaced out so that it starts to show the natural curvature in the fly, or the buildup of the taper in the fly. And you may have to twist this up every wrap or two to kind of keep that going, because it's going to twist up first when it's on the hook shank, and it takes more twists to get this to twist to the same kind of spikiness or fluffiness. So you just have to kind of take your time and recognize, and then you can also kind of preen those fibers back as you come around. And we're going to take this all the way up to behind the bead. And if you've got a little bit of a color variation coming up like I do, it looks like this marabou was actually dyed yellow before it was dyed olive. That's okay. Don't worry about it. And I need a little bit more space, so I'm going to pinch this. Oh, it broke. Of course it did. So I'll just capture it and collect it. I'm going to make 2 wraps over the in between the bead and the body with the marabou, and then I'm going to make 2 wraps over on the front side. Now when you're making wraps over on the front side, let me rephrase that. Once you've made your 2 wraps to catch in your body coming forward, you're going to switch your thread to the front side, and what I'll do is I'll actually let that thread slide off the bead and back down, because I don't want, and it's super easy to do, is to have that thread start working back into the marabou, and we don't want that at all. Let me just trim this out. It'll and kind of make the fly look a little funky. Okay, so one thing you may want to, oh, we got a little bit of a long, don't overgroom this either. So what we're going to use here is marabou, or I'm sorry, mohair, to veil over the marabou. And so I'm going to do a split thread technique to capture all the mohair that we're going to use. So I'm going to turn my vise to the side just so I've got room to work, and I'm going to take my bodkin and start to just slide this down and out to help flatten it out. You can twist your thread, you can, whatever it is, all we really need is about 1 inch or so of this thread to open up. And so once I've kind of got that process started, I'll go ahead and let that bobbin, it's going to slowly just keep spinning in the direction of flattening out. Once I do that, I'll let that take place while I prep the veil. So next, you've got your mohair, and it looks all crazy and squiggly like this. If it comes off a card, you'll see little bends in the on the actual strand that's holding this fiber, which is essentially wool. And but if you don't have that, or you're working, if you're working on something that doesn't have that bend, you can kind of take your bodkin and pinch it so that it lines up like this. Now the reason I want to do that is so that I can form a loop pretty easily. You can form a loop other ways. That's just I think that's just kind of the way that allows me to draw the fiber that I want off there. I know it's a little tough to see. I just don't want much fiber here. We just don't need a whole lot. And so basically what comes off of the tip of that loop is really about the right amount for me. You can make it a little bit more or less. Now you can cut this away right here from the actual holding strand, or you can pull it off, whatever you want to do. Once you have it in hand, you want to just kind of do your best to align the craziness that's going on there. And then I'll actually take it and I'll try to form another loop by just having it flat, pinch the middle, and then I'll take, that's my right thumb, right index, and then I'll take my left thumb, left index, and just slide them off the two to form this little loop here. And come straight in and just make a cut. And I'll do that a couple of times. And work back and forth until you have it where you want it. Now some of this is going to pull out when we're tying it too, so you want to keep that in mind. So having a little extra is not a big deal. You just want to keep working it till you have the amount that you want to use. And if it's too long, don't worry about it. So now that I have something about like this, which is really, it's just not much hair at all. I mean, you could read letters through this on my fingers. I'm going to set that aside for just a second. Now I'm going to come back to my thread. I'm going to take my bodkin and kind of work this thread open a little bit. And I want to split it by taking the point of my bodkin, just pressing it into my finger and running it down. So I've got about my inch. Just don't need a whole lot here. It can be a little tricky to get this in. So I'm going to try to turn this to the side so you can see. So what I'll do is I'll place it on the one side, or the down, in my case it's the down piece of thread. And then I'll just force it through, let go of let my left index release the tension holding that open, let go, and now I can kind of slide this into place just like that. Next, what I'm going to do the easy way, because we don't need to have a super wind up on this, but I do want this to be spaced out about that inch, pretty close. Next, I'm just going to take it, I'm going to spin my bobbin and just start letting that thread twist together. Once it starts rolling and you can kind of see it interlocking in the thread, that's really, that's good enough. We're going to glue it a little bit here, and we don't need to be super crazy. So next I'm going to just bring it forward, and again I'm going to slide it up off the bead, my thread up off the bead, so that I'm not touching into the actual body. And as I do this, I can start to preen these fibers back. You can start moving them around where you need them to lay to get full coverage, or the coverage that you're looking for. Maybe you just want it off the top, or maybe you just want legs off the bottom, whatever it is you're looking for. And we're going to get about 3 turns in. Nice and tight. Now that's in. And you can kind of take a look around. If you've got a gap somewhere that you want filled, you can back your thread off a little bit, come back, adjust that, and then retighten. If you don't do it now, it's not going to happen easily later, not without running the risk of really messing up your collar. So the way I like to lock it in place is I just get my super glue. I'm going to run, I was going to run a little. I'm going to run a little super glue just along my thread, and again working my thread up on the bead and letting the thread slide back down onto itself. I'm going to get about 3 turns in, and now I'm ready to whip finish this thing. And then you get, 3 or 4 turns is probably plenty. Don't let your thread wraps, see how it wants to keep sliding to the back there? Don't let it do that. Try not to let it do that anyway. And another thing you want to take into consideration is the hook eye. Make sure when you whip finish, you're releasing your whip finish anywhere but down underneath the eye, because your thread will get caught in there, or it's got an increased chance of getting caught in there. So keep that in mind. Now I can just trim my thread, and I'm going to take just a touch more glue and hit the collar up. And we have a durable, fishable fly. These flies are actually super easy to tie. I know I kind of took the long way of explaining it, but that's what the classes are for, and that's what these videos are for, is to show you different techniques of other ways you can skin the cat and try to cover as much as possible just inside one short video. If you have too much hanging out the back or the hair is too long, just kind of run your fingers out to the distance, open up your scissors, and kind of saw it off. Don't really cut it, just kind of saw it. If you pinch and pull with these hairs being that fine and the glue still being potentially pretty wet, they may just pull out, and then you've lost them. So, and when it gets wet, it's going to look like this, very similar. It's going to have that wet caddis look in that pupae state area. Jeez, I always have a hard time saying that one. I always want to add a D to it. So that's it. It's the 2 cent 2 cent caddis variation on a jig hook. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. And if you're not a member of Fly Tying for Beginners and you found this video, check us out over on Facebook. This video is a part of those classes. Check out other videos I've done. Good majority of them are from previous classes. And then also, if you're interested in getting material kit for all 6 weeks and you want to follow along online, you can go over to flyvault.net, and individual patterns will be available there, as well as an entire kit for all 6 weeks. So check that out. And other than that, tie a few up and go fish them. It's a pretty neat little pattern. It's great caddis imitation. So happy tying, everybody, and take care.